forum. For those who have not participated in the two previous sessions, which were Introduction to Responsible Tourism Practices and Responsible Destination, on November 6th, discussed in the couple of sessions that there are several limitations in calling sustainable initiatives green, and primarily because water, energy, procurement, start to explore the environmental issues, we see the links to the other dimensions, which is social and economic spheres. Widespread sustainability provide an introduction to understanding the key principles of sustainable accommodation. The second part will be done by Mr. Mark Pye. We'll see actually the excellent alignment be moderating the session, and I will compile your questions as you post them, so kindly indicate who they are addressed to. Let me introduce the world of academia and business, and makes her one of the most pragmatic academics I have worked with. She will be presenting the business case for sustainability in the hotel industry, and please welcome Sonia.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That's such a nice introduction. Be going over case for the hotel industry, and it's something that I for the past decade. So because I have 20 minutes, I am going to go through it fairly quickly. But Jacqueline and I have worked on a green hotels guide that actually is available online, and I will provide you with that on the last slide. So all this information really is in the guide, which is a how-to actually green your accommodation. So just for a brief introduction to the impacts of the hotel industry, I'm sure we are all very familiar with the fact that the accommodation industry has impacts, not necessarily massive impacts on an individual level, but collective impacts. And especially different destinations, we think about the fact that 75% of these environmental impacts can be directly related to excessive consumption. That's kind of the business, right? When we think about water use and energy use and waste generation, a lot of it can actually be reduced. It's good business, it's good practice. Just to give you a quick little statistic, 50,000 or 15,000 cubic would typically supply 100 rural farmers for 3 years and 100 urban families for 2 years, yet only supply 100 luxury hotel guests for less than 2 months. So we know that the problem really is overconsumption and the excessive nature of the accommodation industry. So when we look at why an accommodation business would go green, whether it's a small to a large mega resort, I've worked on both scales. Really, when you think about it, a lot of it is due to this idea of the business case. And I'm going to really go through not so much in detail. As I said, I think that there's several publications that really talk about the business case. Collectively, worked on another report on the business case in Canada in terms of the accommodation industry. But when we look at, so a lot of my references will be based on Canada, but when we look at the case for going green, cost savings always seems to be the major factor. But there's also competitive advantage, employee loyalty, customer retention, the idea of regulatory compliance, and that differs from destination to destination, risk management, social responsibility, the fact that this is the industry future, and most importantly, the funny thing in a lot of my studies is that a lot of general managers really focus on the fact that it's the right thing to do. And I think as time is moving on, and as we see that overconsumption is not necessary, this idea of your own social responsibility really is the focus of the business case as to why you're going green. So in terms of cost savings, I don't think that this is anything new. I mean, statistics identify that hotels can reduce 20 to 40% of energy without affecting performance. I've conducted waste audits in hotels where 50% of their waste is compost, and then that could be easily diverted. So when you think about it, there really is a big cost savings. Just to give you a quick little kind of case study of the Fairmont Royal York, years ago in the 90s, they invested $25,000 to replace leaky stream taps, something that seems very simple. Technology has increased. A lot of hotels have focused more on bigger energy efficiency initiatives. So for example, the Comfort Inn and Suites in Red Deer, Alberta in Canada implemented a roof-based solar energy system, and that system cost them $1.4 million. However, the hotel can go up to 14 days without sun, and the maintenance is inexpensive. So I think there's lots of different examples of the cost savings, and that's kind of talked about quite a bit. And even small initiatives like we looked at with the Royal York can really be, can end up being a big cost savings. In terms of competitive advantage, it's funny, when I started doing this work in early 2000, a lot of the major hotel chains really focused on the competitive advantage because big companies such as General Motors and Gamble at that time, as well as the Canadian government, chose hotels that were based on their level of sustainability. You can see now of the brands that are coming about Hyatt that they're really on this green market and efficiency. So they're really advantage with hotels that are accommodations that are really focusing on this, on green initiatives. And I'm really, what Mark's going to talk about, I think Sandals is at the forefront of the accommodation. Something that I'm talking to and focusing on has been at the forefront. Retaining employees, again, since it really started this whole drive in the early 90s, they really focused on employees and really garnering the support of employees. Recently, I've worked with Delta Hotels and their Delta Greens program, and they also fostered the enthusiasm and the motivation of their employees to really drive the program. Grassroots feel. So what I found in my work, even internationally, is that a lot of accommodations are focusing on employees to provide ideas for greening initiatives, and they're providing incentives. So for example, if housekeeping staff has a great idea about how energy can be reduced, whether it's just by something simple such as closing the blinds or whatever it is that initiative that they've thought of, there are monetary incentives, or in the case of Fairmont, really kind of this competitive incentive, perhaps the implements the most the one that the hotel of the year, something like a free trip. Various different ways to excite employees and really gain their loyalty. I'd say customer retention is, there's a lot out there in terms of statistics about customer retention and how about greening practices. I have a statistic on here that indicates that from a particular study, 75% of customers say it's important to stay at a hotel that follows green practices. I think increasingly there's a savvy eco market out there, and that's where these kind of green, cheap, and chic hotels are coming from. It's more from the corporate side. When you look at, I also work in the meetings industry and greening of meetings, and when you look at these different trends with the blue and green meeting initiatives and sustainable meetings, a lot of the bigger hotel chains are really focusing on that to gain customers, to gain that corporate customer. In terms of regulatory compliance, that's something that I kind of always, I think hotels, this is into this. I think hotels are really trying to stay ahead of regulatory compliance, but a lot of initiatives are influenced by regulatory change and international agreements. When we look at things like carbon taxes that are potentially going to be created, or within municipalities, when we look at waste management fees, especially for hotels, then that kind of spurs this idea of regulatory compliance. Hotels really kind of need to stay one step ahead of the game so they're not caught with costly initiatives in the end. Risk management has always also been something that the financial community has really pushed and focused on, especially when you look at banks and you look at insurance companies and what they would prefer to fund. So banks and insurance companies have been, I'd say in the last several years, to adjust their rates based on environmental criteria, because the more environmentally sound a building is, the less risky it really is. So I think that, as you can see, with even certification programs and focusing on, things like ISO 14001, where you're examining all the aspects and impacts of your facility, that program really shows that there is a level of good management within the facility, and that becomes attractive. As I said, in terms of social responsibility, I think that there's increasing concern for social obligations and values, and there's a focus on supporting the local economy and increasing the multiplier effect. And I really am looking forward to hearing what Sandals is doing, because I think Sandals does a very good job as well with focusing on the local community. And there's a lot of different examples. The Holiday Inn has their Hotels in Partnership program, where they try to minimize leakage in the community and work with local suppliers such as bakeries and dry cleaners. And I always thought it was really interesting, because when I was doing some of this work, I thought that it was interesting that the Holiday Inn tended to attach the level of environmental performance to the general manager's annual report and merit. So really kind of ingraining this idea of social responsibility. So I think by hotels taking the lead on self-regulation, can prepare in advance and avoid expensive remedial measures. Energy is getting more expensive. Water is becoming more expensive. Waste is becoming more expensive to dispose of. Employees, good business doesn't want a high turnover rate. So in terms of industry future, good business. This idea, as I said, about it's the right thing to do, that really is something that I think businesses all over, but if we look at the hotel industry, is recognizing the environment, the community, and their human capital as a valuable resource to be protected. And so when you look at corporate social responsibility in the hotel industry, there has been several cases especially when we look at the bigger chains, but as well as also in the smaller facilities, to collectively come together and improve the natural environment and the social environment within the destinations that they work. So when we think about barriers to action, I indicate that it's not yet mainstream, but pressure is increasing. I mean, when you think about the fact that greening of, hotels have been talking about greening since 1994. So we at this point, it's still not yet mainstream, and I think that's for several reasons. I think, though, that annual reporting on social and environmental measures is now creating more of a movement. I think a lot of the barriers are related to the fact that there is lack of information out there. There is, especially for a lot of the smaller operators, and also there is lack of operators. But I think when the word gets out, and I like this green hotels guide that Jacqueline and I worked on, that provides some form of framework for businesses to work on. So a lot of it really is small. It doesn't have to be big energy efficiency initiatives. A lot of it can be phasing in the small initiatives first, and then working and then investing in bigger initiatives. I think to action, I think that there needs to be forums such as this, in the sense that there needs to governments and industry associations, and I think it's the social responsibility, bigger hotel chains, to share their best practices and information on benefits, and to really disseminate information and let hotels in on the benefits of growing green, because that information really is the power to getting this done. So, tools for success. Again, this is all laid out in this Green Hotels Guide on how to begin this. How do you start this? What do I do to even get this going? And in terms of the different tools, the focus really is this idea of identifying a green champion. In all my experiences dealing with different hotel chains in different parts of the world and different facilities, there really is this idea of a green champion. And it has to, whether it's the general manager, whether it's someone who's actually, whether it's the director of operations, someone who actually has a role in decision making and can actually be what you would consider the green champion. For the Delta Greens program, it is their CEO. He is the green champion. He really drove a lot of this. So it was easier for them, I think, as a chain to really implement change initiatives because the CEO is on board. But there also needs to be a dedicated green coordinator, and that is because someone needs to actually do all of this work, because it is work. So the coordinator focuses on organizing the green team, so really getting together a group of people and who are interested in this and who will drive it on a volunteer basis or with some form of time dedicated from their normal work days. I think that you need someone to coordinate the environmental audits of water, waste, energy, carbon emissions, and purchasing. And whether or not you go out and conduct those audits with a consultant, there needs to be someone in-house that actually coordinates all this and gets the feedback from a lot of the different stakeholders within the organization. And there needs to be someone who monitors the performance. So the green champion is really key, and this green coordinator is really key at the property level. So just to give you an example, Six Senses Hotels and Resorts, they have a dedicated social and environmental coordinator at the chain level, also a dedicated environmental analyst, and at the property level, they have a full-time social coordinator. That kind of seems like quite a bit, but the idea is just to get someone who's really, really keen on this, involved, and wants to drive it forward. Setting a base thing that is necessary, and really that's just measuring. That's measuring what is it that you produce in terms of waste, in terms of water, in terms of energy, in terms of carbon, in terms of purchasing. Benchmarking is crucial of the environmental program because you must know what you produce before you can reduce it. So you can't come up with strategies and ideas. And we're going to get into the next, which is, in the next few slides, about actually developing goals. You cannot develop a goal that you could stick to if you don't know exactly what you're using. In terms of employee engagement, And that's also important because you want to get about this. As I said, it really is a grassroots, bottom up and a top down approach. And without the support of employees, the environmental program will not be successful. So the Fairmont really started this kind of idea of the Ideas campaign and really fostering employee knowledge and enthusiasm for their particular strategies. And this is something that can actually happen to reduce the various impacts. So setting an action plan is also they're all very important steps. So I think that in order to achieve results, though, this is based on your benchmarking and your measurement, goals should be set on an annual basis, and you use these different environmental audits as a baseline. The goals are measurable. So such goals such as, reduce energy consumption where possible might be a good idea, but it's much too vague to be practical. So there really needs actual measurable goals, such as, replace all incandescent light bulbs with fluorescence wherever possible, or basically to have something that can be translated into meaningful, such as a % of reduction in a year, and then you can actually calculate how much money that reduction saved. So you also should look at, as I said earlier, phasing in initiatives. What's the low-hanging fruit first? Is the easiest thing to do to change all the light bulbs? Is the easiest thing to do to put in faucet aerators? And then you look at your different strategies and you phase it in with the easiest initiatives first, so you can actually create some quick wins, so there's inspiration and enthusiasm to keep moving forward. In terms of the green team, I mentioned that previously when we talked about a coordinator. There needs to be a group of people, whether it's chain-wide, whether it's focused on the actual facility itself. If it's a small facility, it doesn't need to be a huge number in terms of getting things, the audits, basically having the audits implemented, looking at technical expertise. So perhaps part of your green team, some of them are engineers, so they can actually conduct the audits. You can have department from the front desk or food and beverage or housekeeping. And the idea is to keep groups to a manageable size to ensure decision making. So the green team is really the one that is driving all these different initiatives and liaising pretty much between senior management, between the chain, and the employees. Developing an environmental policy statement is something that, again, this comes from stakeholder engagement and employee engagement, but really communicating the mission, the goals, and the targets both internally and externally. Once you've developed those targets, once you know what your be, once this is something that your company really wants to focus on, then developing a well-written policy statement that expresses what those goals are is quite necessary in order for everyone to keep on track. The next probably initiative is really employee training and looking at and objectives from your action plan and how these can be incorporated into your employee training and job descriptions. You need to communicate in several ways to different employees, especially if, for example, you're asking them to do things that might be out of their job description. Recycling initiative, and you want the housekeeper to separate, recyclables from the recycling bin into 4 or 5 different categories. That's something that's beyond their job description. So to train them and to incorporate it into the job descriptions, a little more advantage and gets employees on board versus just asking them and expecting that they're going to do this. Benchmarking and reporting, as I identified before, there needs to be a measure to build different strategies for continuous improvement. What are we going to do next year? You have to revisit and measure and monitor what worked this year. Perhaps your goals were too broad, perhaps your goals were too big, and there needs to be a feedback loop. And also the This is where reporting comes in. And annual reports are now including a lot of environmental initiatives, especially from larger businesses, but integrating a section on the website, whether it's the internal website or producing even a newsletter once a year that identifies what your wins are, really is able to communicate the results of what's happening. I just identified some of the best practices, and because we have Mark online next, he will probably touch more on the different best practices. All these hotel chains and different in terms of energy, water, waste, green meetings, purchasing. There's been a big focus these days on green building practices, promoting the local economy and really integrating farmers and integrating local food and food into menus, and social responsibility, focus on conservation and customer education. So there's some great examples out there of what's been going on, really inspiring things from all levels and all sizes of the accommodation industry. So just to kind of sum it up, I think that this is something that came from, it's a consulting from Deloitte, but they estimated that the 2010 Hospitality Game Changers report states that hotels have to develop an environmentally responsible brand and really embed a 360-degree view of sustainability within the business model. So not only focusing on energy conservation, but really looking at the social elements, looking at employees, looking at consumers and customers, and quality, brand, and convenience will continue to drive consumer spending, but sustainability will increasingly be part of the decision-making process. And I just wanted to leave off, because I really love this quote, and I think once I read this, way back in 2003, myself, this is exactly what really drives sustainability in a lot of these organizations, the ones that really have started and really believe in the ethic of sustainability. And this is from David Roberts, who's the general manager of Fairmont Chateau Whistler Resort. And he indicated that we all have the power of one. Each one of us can begin to make a difference, and collectively, a lot of individuals can move mountains or save them, and corporations can make single decisions to shift policy that in time will cultural and behavioral change. And this was written, almost 10 years ago. This was stated, over 10 years ago, but it still holds true. And I think that there really needs to be more of a collective action. So, having said all that, I want to direct you to the Green Hotels Guide, and that will give you a lot more information on how to start, how to begin, how to continue. And here's my contact information if anyone has any further questions after this webinar.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonia, for the very thorough presentation. So as you can see, the framework for greening accommodation exists today, and not areas that businesses are facing. Lagging on addressing sustainability really will become a major issue of competitiveness, because we are coming to realize that we need to look at embedding green into the whole travel industry. Now we move on to Mark, who is calling us from Jamaica. So thank you for joining us, Mark, and for Sandoz to sponsoring this session. Mark's bio is online, and since we want to hear what Sandoz is doing, I'll just, without much ado, pass it on to Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here, and it is a pleasure to share with the world our steps to taking better efforts at sustainability. I think Sonia really had set a good framework of what is required, and we, in our efforts, try to follow that framework very closely. So our environmental program is called Sandoz Earth Guard, and it is powered by EarthCheck. And one of the things that we realized is that we do have a significant impact on our Caribbean territory that we're in. As you can see there, the islands that we're in, and by virtue of having 19 properties in those islands, including a head office, which brings it up to 20 locations in 5 countries, the impact is very evident and very clear. And if we don't take a sustainable look at how we scale our operations and how we design our operations, then we don't take our environment. In the beginning, we looked at was in terms of corporate social responsibility, moral responsibility, and so on. And we decided to make that impact. The green program is Sandals the Grill. First, all-inclusive side green globe. And we pretty much that research. One of the things we found was that in Jamaica, much of the coral reefs were dying. Smog in Kingston, also significant risk of deforestation. So as a corporation, we said that it is time for us to make that change and really begin to impact our environment in a positive way. That we needed to make that impact through our team members. So our response to Sandals Earth Guard, Sonia pointed to the identification of environmental champions, green champions. We have those at all of our resorts. We have a dedicated environmental health and safety manager at 19 resorts. And they're all led by our corporate leadership in terms of putting forward the environmental management agenda for the company. And those environmental health and safety managers are responsible for being leaders of the green culture on property by empowering green teams with a focus on to initiate at a property level. For our efforts over the years, since 1998, when we piloted the program at Sandals McGrill, we received many awards for efforts, and it's part of our effort to really become a leader so that others can follow our example. In resort actions, including retrofitting lighting, heat recovery systems, and setting a general company mandate of some of the specifications that has to be used in all our resorts so that we can properly manage our energy consumption. Also, as relates to but to make sure that water is recycled. For example, the reusing of gray water from ice machines for irrigation, better water efficiency systems, low flush toilets, low flush shower heads, aerators, auto flush systems, pedal valves, and so on. So in all the elements that we can impact the environment, we try to we're conserving as well as making a positive impact. In terms of general operations, through our supply chain, we try to reach out to our supply chain and specific criteria specifically at new ways that we can consume energy in a better way, efficient ways, looking at alternative energy sources and so on. But back to this fuel management system, since implementing it, we have looked at giving each fleet operators an advanced fuel card, and that has helped us to monitor our fuel chain. We started it in Jamaica, and 3 months of implementation saved over 27,000 liters of fuel, and that goes into our general performance management of our environmental footprint for the company. Now, in terms of the environmental champions that we pointed to, each are champions, are leaders. However, they need enhanced training, and we are committed to investing in training for those environmental champions so that they can be trainers not only for team members on a resort, but within communities, level community leaders in reaching out to the communities that surround our resorts, as well as training for wider resort team members. I mentioned before the recruitment of property, EHS managers, leaders for those green teams in terms of leading their ideas so that everyone can participate in the environmental management of the company. Also, deeper integration with the Sandals Foundation. The Sandals Foundation has a mandate of community and education. We've reached out to many schools in surrounding areas in terms of spreading the message of community, environment, education to many schools. Generation that is a more environmentally responsible generation. So we're reaching out to the schools through a special schools program, which will talk about the environment as well as get them to participate in their own way in their homes, to look at their energy consumption at home, to look at their water consumption at home through fun, interactive activities that they actually are auditing their parents in terms of consumption and so on. And of course, the enhancement of our recycling program. We are already doing recycling, but we want to step up the level of recycling that we do to ensure that all of the plastics that we utilize are centrally managed and that we can successfully export plastics to recycling centers that can turn them over into actual products for the future. And of course, development of new guest and staff engagement activities. This is so important to us because, as I said before, we have 10 across our chain. Those 10,000 team members are from many communities in the Caribbean, and also we have close to 1 million visitors that visit us every year at all our resorts. But we need to engage them at a higher level. At the end of the day, awareness breeds action. We'll make a push to our team members and guests that come through our walls are carried through a narrative of what Sandals Earth God is. For our guests, what they can do at home and during their vacation. For our team members, what they can do at work and in their community. This goes beyond just the reusing of towels, and for our staff goes beyond basic environmental education. It speaks to giving our guests experiences that taking our guests to greenhouses and making them pick fruit from those greenhouses and have a fine dining experience with the natural ingredients from those greenhouses. Again, new exciting ways to engage them into and the reasons why they have to be environmentally responsible when they get back home. So in full sense, we want to be leaders for the environmental movement, and we want to step forward in a very positive way to be a leader in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is where we're based, and the Caribbean is a very fragile area in terms of being close to beaches. It's prone to hurricanes, and it's important that we make an impact to be leaders so that others can follow our example and that we can step forward in a positive way. So in essence, I want to end with a quotation and following on Sonia's lead. And this one is an old one. It's from a different time, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. The dogma of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew for all ourselves, and then we shall save our country. Sandals is a luxury included vacation. However, we have taken on the theme of change included, where we're taking steps to enhance, actually calculate how much carbon they save per room night that they decide to stay with us. So we're making big steps beyond regulatory requirements, beyond the business imperatives of saving for cost efficiency. We see this as an intrinsic motivation that we try to share with the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was wonderful. I definitely would like to echo your Sandals wants to go beyond the business case, and that intrinsic motivation really is to create the conditions where tourism is a force for good for all those involved, right? The business, the employees, the community, the environment. And in the last couple of sessions, we talked about the purpose, and we described what we call intergenerational justice, looking forward 25, 50 years, 100 years, which is very difficult and in an business environment where the next quarter is the imperative. As Mark said, we really do need to go over and above and beyond what is considered acceptable practices today. And that's what leadership is. And we really thank you for setting an example for the industry. And we really look forward to other of your peers following on your footsteps. So thank you again. We have actually minutes for questions. We have received a couple of them. Perhaps Sonia, you could start, and there's two if you want to address them together. The one from Laura regarding whether studies that have been done of hotels voluntarily adopting this initiative. There's also the one from Elizabeth, where she talks about are consumers willing to pay more? Are there any studies? And then why don't we start with those two, and then we go on to Mark, where give him a little bit of time to think it through, from Raquel, which discusses on your initiatives, basically what should agent consumers be looking for in identifying sustainable properties. So Sonia, you are okay to go through?
Yep. So my thought, there's been studies on both. Okay. For whether or not there's been particular studies on how many, I'm trying to find the question. Sorry, it might take me a sec. Laura's question. There are all kinds of different studies out there. But has a comprehensive study been done to get a sense of statistics and the probably has their statistics, but there has comprehensive. I've done say B&Bs in Ontario, done studies on in particular areas, and I've done studies on hotels in small areas, but comprehensively, there has not been a study that looks at what hotels have actually done, whether it's national-wide or in an international context, because I think that there are so many various different programs, and that's a huge undertaking. And I think especially with the Hotel Association of Canada or any other self-assessing certification program, is that they do have the data, they just do not publish it out to the broader public. So I'm sure there have been. I haven't actually ever come across any, to be honest. Only bits and pieces of whatever people really want to publish. The second question about customers, it's kind of the same idea. You have, and maybe Mark has a better understanding of this, because I would assume that a company would look at a market study and identify whether or not their clients would want to pay more. There's a lot of marketing organizations, or there's particular studies in terms of greening in general. There's some studies in terms of whether people would want to pay more that have been done by different websites. But again, there's nothing that's across the board. There's various statistics, and with all forms of statistics, I think you have to take it with a grain of salt, because a lot of the statistics that were coming out about pay-per-use, I did one in Indonesia and Thailand on pay-per-use, and customers identified an eco-tax, for example. So there isn't anything on either of those levels.
Sonia, since we have Joan with Mark in the other question, is that okay? So John asked, can you elaborate a little bit more about on the risk management side?
Well, when I speak of risk management, that's something, again, that's really focused on just corporate social responsibility in general for businesses. But I think for lending organizations is that a business that has implemented an environmental management system, mostly like an ISO 14001, has conducted a gap analysis. They've basically looked at all the inefficiencies of their business and have corrected them. Also, they're not going to be fined for not being in compliance. So if you have an environmental management strategy, or you are more than likely in compliance. So, and you've gone above and beyond that. So that means that you're a good business. So from a risk management perspective, if you were a lending organization, you probably hedge your better bet on the business that has good practices than the one that might be a loose cannon and might, be fined, or might have something in the newspaper, in the media, that identifies them as not being a good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I may add, for publicly traded big hotel chains, the risk management is instrumental in the value of their shares, and part of the whole due diligence process of making sure that they have energy security, that the supply of transportation and client through their hotels. So that's another aspect of risk management for different ownership structures also. Mark, so Raquel,
yes.
Question up. So which is a really good question. Could you kindly address that for us?
Yeah, man, it's a very good question by Raquel, and I think with the carbon economy coming, it is something that a lot of partners in the travel industry would want to know, that what truly makes a hotel sustainable, and how do you know? I think a key thing to ask them is, do they have an environmental management program and an environmental policy? But beyond that, are they participating in third-party auditing of their environmental program? For example, the Green Globe, EarthCheck, who is doing the third-party auditing of their environmental program? I think that is something that you can truly define if someone is truly
being taken on a voluntary basis by hotels, and they sometimes don't have this third-party certification, which does not, invalidate it in a way. But when it is promoted as a green property, and you need to basically do a bit of homework in terms of understanding if they are third-party verified or not, because there's also
Yeah,
bogus claims out there, right?
definitely.
Yeah, and right now, because there isn't a level playing field, there's so many certifications out there that is extremely confusing for both the trade and the consumers, right?
Yes.
Green Globe is highly recognized, and you have EarthCheck, and there's Green Key, and so on and so on. We have
Hmm.
that's a separate workshop altogether, and we'll address that at another point. Is really kind of going through and understanding the certifications are most credible,
Yeah.
I guess. Right.
Yeah, definitely. And for those certifications, in terms of what is the background research and so on behind a lot of those certifications, one of the reasons why we decided to stay with EarthCheck is because of its high standard in terms of the scientific research. They keep reinventing themselves in terms of some of the things that can be done and should be done in the accommodation sector.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the reinventing themselves. That's very important to understand that this is a moving field, right? Essentially, we're looking at new technology that it's allowing us to measure much better. Research that is being done that explains, some triggers on behavior from the point of view of the guests, as well as motivation for employees. There is a lot of stuff that it's coming out, and I was just at the Canadian Business for Social Responsibility conference last week, and they unfortunately there's not a lot of tourism representation there, but they are really big corporations, from Walmart's to Canadian Tire to and we have gone a long way in understanding the implications. Where we seem to be lacking and falling behind is the action part of it, which is and to echo Mark's words again, awareness breeds action. We also need the multi-level approach to governments laying down some regulations and guidelines, as well as the private sector taking the initiative, such as we have seen today that Sandals continues to do, and the leadership that they have demonstrated. So I think we don't have any additional questions right now, and we have reached it is 2 o'clock. So I would like to thank everyone for their participation. It has been an outstanding webinar, and you can download it. Please pass on to your colleagues and friends, students, whoever is interested in sustainability in tourism. We have 3 sessions left. We have transportation impact, venture travel, and volunteerism. So please register if you haven't done so already.